Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 14, 2024. President-elect Donald Trump chooses Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Health and Human Services Secretary. The Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, demands the House Ethics Committee turn over its report on now former Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, who's been nominated by President-elect Trump for Attorney General. Nikki Haley, former Republican presidential candidate, says she turned down an offer from a Trump ally to reconcile with the president-elect and maybe join the administration. The incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, talks about how he plans to run the Senate in the next Congress. It includes bringing up individual government spending bills for debate and amendment, instead of rolling them all into one big bill at the end of the year. A bipartisan group of senators tries to get a bill through today to replenish the Small Business Administration's disaster loan program, which is run out following the hurricanes that hit the southeast United States, but the bill is blocked by Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. And President Joe Biden flies to Peru for the APEC summit, where he's planning to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping before going to Brazil for the G20 summit, likely final major overseas diplomatic trip of his presidency. Story from CNN, President-elect Donald Trump has picked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be his next Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, a choice that would add to Trump's list of provocative picks, whose confirmation processes will test the loyalty of Senate Republicans. Trump on Thursday announced the selection, confirming CNN's earlier reporting, saying he was thrilled to share the pick. He wrote on X, "The safety and health of all Americans is the most important role of any administration, and HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country. Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again." That was reporting from CNN. Today on Capitol Hill, the U.S. Oversight and Accountability Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic held its final hearing with federal health officials testifying on lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and how to prepare for a future pandemic. Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, brought up the possibility of the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. nomination.
I'm very, very concerned that someone that could be entrusted with our nation's health, RFK Jr., has recently said, and I quote, that he plans to have a big role in the administration as it relates to health, and has just days ago pledged to gut the NIH, firing hundreds of scientists and researchers on day one. And I'm going to show, this is from ABC News, the headline that just appeared a few days ago, which, if we're talking about pandemic preparedness, and with all due respect to the committee and the work, the fact that we're considering to bring somebody on with no scientific or medical credentials, who's falsely claimed for decades that vaccines cause autism, who has, quite frankly, said just outrageous comments about science and medicine, that this person would come in to gut the NIH, I think is shameful. I think is shameful. And Ms. Green, you can clap all you want, but it is shameful, it's dangerous, and if this committee is about pandemic prevention, we should be very concerned as a country that RFK Jr. could be put in charge of health when he is a vaccine denier and has caused great harm to the American public. I want to say just finally that I'm very concerned that someone that wants to gut the NIH, HHS, and other services could be put in charge of health of any kind in this country. And so I want to thank you, sir, for your service at the NIH and for all the witnesses that are here. And with that, I yield back.
Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, at today's House Select Coronavirus Pandemic Subcommittee hearing, the final one of the Congress. And this was before it was announced that officially President-elect Donald Trump is nominating Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. You heard Congressman Garcia refer to Congresswoman Green, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia. She spoke later in the hearing against the policy of promoting and requiring vaccines.
When you talk about vaccine hesitancy, as one sitting before you that never took the COVID vaccine, nor will I take it. Thank God. I'm so glad I didn't take it. Yes, this vaccine hesitancy has risen to new heights. And I can tell you right now, I'll stand here and represent all the Americans that do not ever want to be forced to take another vaccine that the government is telling us to take after they created a deadly virus. I can tell you right now, I'll also represent all the Americans that never want their children to be forced to be vaccinated. Currently, right now, the CDC is recommending that children as young as 6 months have 2 doses of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine or 3 doses of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. So vaccine manufacturers continue to make billions and billions of dollars on a vaccine that doesn't work, being forced on children, innocent children that don't even need it, because they aren't at risk of being hospitalized or dying from this vaccine. Not only that, vaccines need to be investigated further. The rise of autism, learning disabilities, neurological problems, and so much more that children are suffering from today absolutely is being forced upon these children and their families because of these vaccines.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia at today's House Select Coronavirus Pandemic Subcommittee hearing about how to prevent future pandemics. Later in the day, President-elect Donald Trump announced that he will nominate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Health and Human Services Secretary. Congresswoman Greene posting that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the perfect pick by President Trump to lead Health and Human Services. Bobby is firmly committed to ending the epidemic of chronic disease, taking on Big Pharma, who are focused on profits over health, and protecting our children from food that makes them sick. On the U.S. House floor today, the House clerk announced the resignation of Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, whom President-elect Donald Trump says he will nominate for Attorney General.
Chair lays before the House of Communications.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, I hereby resign as a United States Representative for Florida's 1st Congressional District, effective immediately, and I do not intend to take the oath of office for the same office in the 119th Congress to pursue the position of Attorney General in the Trump administration. Signed sincerely, Matt Gaetz, Member of Congress.
Today on the House floor, a New York Times article reads, the House Ethics Committee, which has been investigating allegations that Representative Matt Gaetz engaged in sexual misconduct and illicit drug use, was prepared to vote to release a highly critical report about Mr. Gaetz on Friday, according to a Republican official familiar with the matter. The release would have come 2 days after President-elect Donald Trump selected Mr. Gaetz to be Attorney General. Mr. Gaetz, Florida Republican, abruptly resigned from his House seat late Wednesday, effectively ending the ethics investigation that has hung over his head for years. Reporting from the New York Times. Today, Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee chair, made a statement to reporters about the issue.
In light of Donald Trump's selection of former Congressman Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, I'm calling on the House Ethics Committee to preserve and share their report and all relevant documentation on Mr. Gaetz with the Senate Judiciary Committee. The sequence and timing of Mr. Gaetz' resignation from the House raises serious questions about the contents of the House Ethics Committee report. We cannot allow this valuable information from a bipartisan investigation to be hidden from the American people. Make no mistake, this information could be relevant to the question of Mr. Gaetz' confirmation as the next Attorney General of the United States and our constitutional responsibility to advise and consent.
He's called this a witch hunt, this ethics committee investigation. He's denied all these allegations. Why don't you believe him?
Well, I just tell you this. The timing of his resignation and flight with President-elect Donald Trump suggests he believes that this report is not friendly and favorable. So I want to read the report and find out what the investigation behind it brought out.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee chair, speaking to reporters on Capitol Hill. Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, a member of the Judiciary Committee, told reporters in a separate place and time that he absolutely wants to see the House Ethics Committee's report on former Congressman Matt Gaetz after the nomination for Attorney General.
On the issue of vetting, though, how critical is it then to have access to what the House Ethics Committee has found in their investigation?
I think there should not be any limitation on the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation, including whatever the House Ethics Committee has generated.
So you want to see it?
Absolutely.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, with reporters. President-elect Donald Trump announced on Wednesday his intent to nominate Matt Gaetz, along with the nominations of Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, for Secretary of State, and former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat from Hawaii, for Director of National Intelligence. Reporters caught up with Senator Rubio in a Senate office building hallway on Wednesday. They also asked him about the Matt Gaetz nomination.
It's a tremendous honor to the President would place his confidence in me in a position of such importance. It's also a tremendous responsibility, and the job of the Secretary of State is to execute on the foreign policy set by the elected President of the United States, and I hope to have the opportunity to do it if my current colleagues here in the U.S. Senate confirm me. So,
Senator Matt Gaetz was also nominated to be the Attorney General of the United States. Would you support that nomination?
Well, I'll be involved in my own. I know Matt for a long time. At one point, years ago, when I was in the state legislature, he actually worked for me. And I was aspiring to be Speaker of the House. So I've known him for a long time. And again, I think the President is entitled to his team, and he's made his appointments. And I like Matt a lot. I know him very well, and I'm confident that if the Senate confirms him, he would do a good job. And again, presidents are entitled to have the people that they want in these key positions to carry out the mandate that's been delivered to him by the voters of the United States.
Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, selected by President-elect Donald Trump to be Secretary of State, speaking to reporters Wednesday. If Senator Rubio is confirmed and resigns from the Senate, then Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, also a Republican, could appoint a new senator to complete Rubio's term. The co-chair of the Republican National Committee, Lara Trump, daughter-in-law of President-elect Donald Trump, was asked on Fox Business Channel about speculation that she could be named. She said, "If I were tapped for this, serving my home state now of Florida, it's a great honor and a great responsibility. Obviously, if this is something I'm asked to do, I would seriously consider it." Tulsi Gabbard, former Democratic Congresswoman from Hawaii, was on Fox News Channel Wednesday night talking about her expected nomination in the Trump administration to be Director of National Intelligence.
Take us into the room or the airplane when this was offered to you. How did it go down?
We had a great conversation and talked a little bit about the work that needs to be done. And I was grateful and honored to accept President Trump's offer to serve our country and support his objective to defend the safety, security, and freedom of the American people as the Director of National Intelligence.
How do you think foreign capitals are taking your nomination and the nomination of other people in the national security apparatus?
It's a good question. I think President Trump has already shown how active he has been in not waiting around for day one on January 20th or 21st, but he's already leading. He's already engaging with so many of these world leaders around the world on the phone constantly, and he's showing the kind of leadership that the American people voted for.
Do you expect resistance from the inside? Because there was a lot of resistance in the first term, and how would you deal with that?
The American people delivered quite an incredible mandate for change in this election, with the popular vote and the electoral vote overwhelmingly saying, hey, we want Donald Trump as president, and we've had enough of the Harris-Biden regime. Of course, there's going to be resistance to change from the swamp in Washington. I think that's kind of the point. The American people are saying, hey, stop looking at yourselves, stop focusing on your own power, your own position, your own bank accounts. How about we have leaders in Washington who are actually looking out for the American people? And on every issue across the board, that's really what it comes down to with what President Trump is trying to accomplish is we have to make sure that our government puts the interests of the American people first.
Tulsi Gabbard on Fox News Channel Wednesday night after President-elect Donald Trump said he will appoint her as Director of National Intelligence, which a Washington Post article notes oversees 18 agencies, including the CIA and FBI, with a combined budget of $76 billion. She is a former Congresswoman, Democrat from Hawaii, also former Democratic presidential candidate who later endorsed Donald Trump for president. She was also in the Hawaii Army National Guard and was deployed to Iraq. Last weekend, Donald Trump wrote on his Truth Social page, "I will not be inviting former Ambassador Nikki Haley or former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to join the Trump administration, which is currently in formation. I very much enjoyed and appreciate working with them previously and would like to thank them for their service to our country." Nikki Haley, who challenged Donald Trump in the Republican presidential primary this year, said on her show, Nikki Haley Live on Sirius XM on Wednesday, she never wanted a position, and Donald Trump knew that.
I had no interest in being in his cabinet. He knew that. But to go a little further, his best friend, Steve Witkoff, came to our house in South Carolina, spoke to me and my husband, and basically wanted a truce between me and Donald Trump. And I told him at the time there was no truce needed, that Trump had my support. There was no issues on my end. And at that point, he was like, "What do you want? Tell me what you want. Is there anything you want?" And I said, "There's nothing I want." And there wasn't anything I wanted. And then several weeks back, I talked to Howard Lutnick, his transition director, and he asked, if I knew of people that would be good in the cabinet, if there was any insight. And what I said is, I think it's really important that Trump surround himself with people that are going to tell him the truth. And I, mentioned someone that I thought would be good for Commerce Secretary, and mentioned that I thought the UN ambassador should be a cabinet pick. But I did not ask anything for me, and I have made it clear to everyone that I was not interested in the administration. So my husband and son were upset and said, "Why didn't you say that in the tweet instead of just wishing him well?" And the truth is, I know the game he was playing. I don't need to play that game, but more importantly, we have to look at the bigger picture. It is time to move on. It is time for us to focus on what America needs to do to be strong again, what America needs to do to be safe. The American people have spoken, and spoken very loudly. And at this point, we should pray that President Trump does well. We should pray that everyone that he appoints does well. We should hope, for the sake of our kids and generations to follow us, that all of this goes forward. So, do I take it personally? No, that's who he is. He can be shallow at times, and I think he showed that, but I don't have to be shallow. And at the end of the day, I'm very comfortable with where I am, and I'm comfortable with what happened. And I would advise our Republicans to understand this is not about a gotcha or, celebrating too much. This is about, let's get to work. We've got a border that needs to be closed. We've got a debt that's out of control. We have a lot of regulations that have been holding back businesses. We've got multiple fires around the world. Now is the time for us to look at strength and peace. I am committed to that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to support the policies. And as we go forward with this radio show, I'm going to continue to talk about the policies. I'm not going to talk about the personality or necessarily anything related to how Donald Trump acts. What I am going to do is talk about the policies. When he does something well, we're going to praise him. When he doesn't do something well, we're going to hit him on it. But we're always going to tell you the truth. And I think that's what the American people have always asked us for. That's what I have always given. And that's what I think we'll do going forward.
Nikki Haley, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, former South Carolina governor, former Republican presidential candidate, on Wednesday on her weekly program on Sirius XM. George Conway, longtime critic of Donald Trump, weighed in on the president-elect's choices for cabinet positions during a panel discussion Wednesday night in Washington hosted by the Society for the Rule of Law.
In the first term, he actually appointed some decent people. Okay? The libs may not have liked them, but there were some pretty competent people. I remember an FBI agent came to talk to the judge I had clerked for, Judge Ralph Winter, on the Second Circuit. And after the interview, Ralph told me that the FBI agent says he was pretty impressed with a lot of these Trump nominees. And I was being vetted at the time for heading the civil division. It's like, the problem that Trump had with appointing those good people, narcissists like to surround themselves with people who are impressive. Like, Trump loves Ivy League degrees. He went so far as to cheat on his SATs to get into Penn. Okay, and so he liked hiring people who were. Who was the guy from Goldman Sachs? He had. He actually had some pretty decent, some decent people in his administration. okay? The problem was they are smarter than he is. They were more honorable than he is, and they would tell him no. Okay? And then they would go and they would, they'd say, can you believe this guy? And they would laugh behind his back, right? I mean, like Tillerson saying the guy's an effing moron, right? That's what they thought of him, and he figured that out after a while. And that didn't work out for his ego. So he's realized he's got to go a different route. People who just are sycophants, and people who he thinks he can control, and people who he thinks are similarly motivated as him. In other words, people like him. Lowlifes. Seriously. That's what we are getting here. I mean, think of the great triumvirate here. We've got Donald Trump getting advice from Elon Musk and Robert Kennedy Jr. Okay? 3 flew over the cuckoo's nest right there.
George Conway Wednesday night in Washington at a program held by the Society for the Rule of Law. This is Washington Today. Incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke today on the Senate floor about how he intends to run the Senate in the next Congress. Starts in January. Republicans will be in the majority. He told the story of playing in a basketball game when he was young, hitting a shot off the backboard, and then having his father tell him that a teammate had been open and he should not have been a ball hog. Senator Thune said as a Senate leader, he'll make sure every senator will contribute.
The leader's office will be a resource, not a roadblock for members seeking to achieve their legislative goals. And that starts with empowering committees, which will in turn ensure that individual members at all levels of seniority have a real voice in the legislation that we consider. As whip, I've consistently advocated for our members' amendments, resulting in over 100 amendment votes this Congress. In the majority, we can do better, and I will continue my commitment to amendments as leader. The committee process is key to developing strong legislation, but all members of the Senate, and not just the members of a particular committee, should have a voice in final legislation through amendments on the floor. Members should assume that amendment votes will be the norm. That will mean taking tough votes at times. But that, folks, is part of our jobs. Members should also expect a return to regular order in the Senate next year. I will devote serious time in the summer to floor consideration of appropriations bills so that we don't constantly wind up with an end-of-the-year pileup and problematic continuing resolutions. And needless to say, the floor priority at the start of the year will be confirming President Trump's nominees. And members should expect an aggressive schedule until those nominees are confirmed. Mr. President, I know communication has been a concern for members of our conference. As whip, I've tried to be very accessible, whether that's by phone or in person. And that's something I intend to continue as Majority Leader. That includes regular, substantive updates for members and staff. Neither members nor staff should be left without information, wondering what's coming next. And I plan to have regular meetings with Speaker Johnson and with the White House to ensure smooth coordination and a strong working relationship between the House, the Senate, and the administration as we work together to implement President Trump's agenda. I'll have more to say on all of this down the road, but for now, I want to once again thank my colleagues for the trust that they have placed in me. And I will work every day to honor that trust and to serve our members and the American people.
The incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor today, one day after his fellow Republicans elected him as their leader in the next Congress. Senator Thune will succeed the current Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who has led the Senate Republican Conference for 18 years. Today, Senator McConnell congratulated Senator Thune and the other members that will come in the leadership team.
Yesterday, Senate Republicans elected leaders to steer our incoming majority through the 119th Congress. Senator Thune, Senator Barrasso, Senator Cotton, Senator Capito, Senator Langford, and Senator Tim Scott have earned the trust and support of their colleagues. I'd like to congratulate each of them and reiterate that the entire Republican Congress stands united and ready to tackle the important work of the country. As I've said before, I'm very much looking forward to taking on this next chapter from a different seat here on the floor. But before the year is out, I'd like to continue thanking the many individuals and teams who have served this institution so well during my time as Republican leader. I've had the privilege of working with consummate experts and relying on the professionalism of so many unsung heroes.
The current Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, today on the Senate floor. In the next Congress, Senate Republicans will have a 53-47 majority, but one of those Republicans is still being challenged. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette writes that state officials will recount the results of the contentious U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania, with Republican former hedge fund CEO David McCormick leading Democratic three-term incumbent Senator Bob Casey by fewer than 30,000 votes as of Wednesday. The automatic recount was triggered under state law because the margin of Mr. McCormick's lead as of Wednesday afternoon was under the half a percentage point threshold. While the race was called for Mr. McCormick by the Associated Press 2 days after Election Day, the recount means that the official winner won't be known potentially up to the final week of November, with the process needing to be completed by November 26th. That was from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The Pennsylvania Secretary of the Commonwealth, Al Schmidt, a Republican, held a virtual news conference today.
Mandatory recounts are triggered any time unofficial results in a statewide race show candidates' vote totals are within 0.5% of each other. In this case, the unofficial totals for Democratic incumbent Bob Casey and Republican candidate Dave McCormick were separated by only 0.43% as of 5 p.m. yesterday. Because that margin is less than 0.5%, state law required me to order a recount. This is the 8th recount that has been legally triggered in the last 20 years. The department estimates the recount cost will be just over $1 million. The most recent recount occurred 2.5 years ago in the 2022 primary contests between Republican U.S. Senate candidates Dave McCormick and Mehmet Oz. That recount cost about $1,053,000. Of the 7 previous recounts that have been legally triggered, 3 were waived by the candidates with lower unofficial vote totals. Of the 4 previous recounts that did occur, the recount confirmed the unofficial outcome each time. Let's discuss what the recount process looks like in Pennsylvania. Right now, boards of elections in all 67 counties are completing the unofficial canvass for every ballot cast in their counties. As of Wednesday afternoon, just over 80,000 ballots remain to be counted. That number comprises approximately 20,000 mail-in and absentee ballots and approximately 60,000 provisional ballots. Today, counties continue that canvass and of outstanding ballots and entered new unofficial results in the department's election reporting website. The totals reported there now for the state Senate race, a U.S. Senate race, and other races are updated numbers from the results reported by counties yesterday. Once each county completes its canvass of all ballots, county officials will then immediately move on to recounting every ballot cast in the U.S. Senate race. That's nearly 7 million paper ballots that our 67 county election offices will recount as they complete the process. During the recount, counties will use a different method or different equipment to tabulate votes than what they use to compile their unofficial results. This is done to ensure any potential tabulation issues can be identified. Counties must begin the recount process no later than Wednesday, November 20th. They must complete the recount by noon on November 26th and must report their results to the Department of State by noon on November 27th. Once we've received all recount results, the department will then publish those online on November 27th. One final note on timing. State law requires counties to submit their unofficial certified results to the department on November 25th this year. Counties will certify the results for all other races by that deadline. Then we'll certify the U.S. Senate results as soon as their recount is completed.
Al Schmidt is the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, giving a virtual statement today on the recount in the U.S. Senate race in his state between incumbent Democrat Bob Casey and Republican challenger Dave McCormick. The current split in the Senate is 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats, with the two independents who caucus with them. So even if this race would be overturned, the Republicans would still be in the majority. And over in the House, our election page at cspan.org shows the Associated Press tally. Republicans, 218 seats. That is the threshold for a majority. Democrats, 209 seats, and 8 still to be called. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio is easy. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays, catch Washington Today. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Associated Press reports that President Joe Biden begins his 6-day visit to Peru and Brazil on Thursday for the final major international summits of his presidency, while world leaders turn their attention to what Donald Trump's return to the White House means for their countries. The visit to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Peru and stops in the Amazon rainforest and at the Group of 20 Leaders Summit in Brazil offer Biden one of the last chances as president to meet with heads of state he's worked with over the years, but world leaders' eyes are firmly affixed on Trump. That was from Associated Press. On the flight down to Peru on Air Force One from Washington, D.C., the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke to reporters.
President Biden enters this APEC summit with the U.S. in a very strong strategic position in the Asia-Pacific. Strong alliances, a strong competitive economic and technological edge, new initiatives in terms of investment, supply chains, trade that are already bearing fruit. The Quad, AUKUS, the Camp David Trilateral as points on the board that he has put over the course of the past 4 years. And so we're very much looking forward to the opportunity to engage with leaders from across the region as President Biden wraps up his tenure. Tomorrow he'll have the opportunity to engage with all of the APEC leaders in a larger plenary session, and then he'll do a trilateral meeting with the President of Korea and the Prime Minister of Japan. That trilateral will mark the progress that we've made since the Camp David summit, including in the security, technology, supply chain, and other realms. And also, critically, we'll focus on making sure that we've institutionalized the trilateral so that it will be an enduring feature of American policy in the Indo-Pacific going forward. And given the bipartisan support for it, we fully expect that it would continue under the next administration, though, of course, they'll make their own decisions. Tomorrow, the president will also have the chance to have a brief meeting with Prime Minister Ishiba of Japan, a bilateral meeting, because the two of them, of course, have not had the chance to meet in person since he became prime minister. And he will have a meeting with President Boluarte of Peru, and at that meeting we'll have deliverables in terms of counter-narcotics, rail, and space. As well as, the opportunity to mark nearly 200 years of strong bilateral ties between our two countries. Then we'll roll into the next day to meeting with President Xi, further meetings at a plenary level with the other APEC leaders, and we'll have more to share on that on the ground when we do further gaggles with you all and with the traveling press corps. Obviously, that meeting with Xi Jinping will be his final meeting with President Xi as president. It's an important opportunity to mark the progress that we've made in the relationship and also to manage it through this delicate period of transition where we want to maintain a degree of stability even as we continue to compete vigorously with the PRC. We need to manage that competition so it doesn't veer into conflict.
The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan speaking to reporters on Air Force One on the flight out of Washington down to Peru for the APEC summit, and then President Biden off to Brazil for a visit to the rainforest and at the G20 summit. Story from Nexstar. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, and Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, engaged in a rare bipartisan pile-on against Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, on the Senate floor Thursday. Senator Paul blocked the unanimous consent vote to refill the now depleted Small Business Administration's disaster relief loan program. Paul accused the Senate of trying to pass a multi-million-dollar plan without having enough tax revenue to fund the disaster loan program. He also said the package was scattered with Green New Deal policies. Tillis and Warner say delaying aid will cause businesses in North Carolina, Southern Virginia, Florida, and Georgia to shutter. While the SBA is encouraging small business owners to apply for loans, no money will be dispersed until Congress refills the program. The program officially ran out of money on October 15th. That was from Nexstar. Senator Tillis wrote in a news release a few weeks ago the Relief Act would appropriate $550 million to fund the SBA Disaster Loan Program account, which would provide $2.475 billion in lending capacity projected to last until the end of 2024. Here he is on the Senate floor trying to pass it, talking about the hurricanes that hit his state.
Businesses are suffering. The Small Business Administration is out of money. They are telling people who have had claims processed that your claim has been approved, and as soon as the federal government replenishes the Small Business Administration account, then they will get the money. Think about that. If you're one of thousands of people in western North Carolina in a landmass the size of the state of Massachusetts, ladies and gentlemen, that is how big the landmass was that had devastating storms, 102 people die, hundreds of businesses out of business. I've got a 20-mile segment of I-40 that is impassable. And it's not from rock slides, it's because the land underneath the roads no longer exists. There are 5 miles that are going to have to be repaired, and 20 years ago, when we had a 0.3 of a mile segment, it took 7 months to repair it, and that was just removing a landslide. The integrity of the roadbed was there. We don't have that anymore. We have 80 miles of rail tracks gone. We have hundreds of businesses out of business right now. We have a major water system that hopes to have drinkable water by Christmas. We have people suffering. We have businesses suffering. We have a disaster that we have to respond to, and a lot of work is going to have to be done before the end of this Congress, and certainly in the next Congress, when the nearly $50 billion between state and federal dollars is going to have to be appropriated just to help North Carolina, not to mention the $3 billion of agricultural damage in Georgia, and I can go down the list of Florida. We've got a lot of work to do, but folks, this is a time where you don't question what we're doing. You don't question how you pay for it. You get the money there and you get these communities back on track. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be paying for this. We absolutely should. And up here in the rarefied air of Washington, D.C., we could say, well, let's just, be responsible about this and let these people suffer until we get it. But that's not how it works in western North Carolina. They need help now, today.
Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, on the Senate floor after he and the other senator from North Carolina, Republican Ted Budd, and Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, made their cases for this bill and asked unanimous consent to pass it. Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, objected.
I lived for 4 months in Asheville, worked at the VA hospital, still have fond feelings for western North Carolina. I have an uncle who lives just up the road from Asheville. I know about the devastation. One of my best friends from my wedding lives in Asheville as well. But the thing is the reason why we won't do this in a responsible way is because the Senate voted to send all your money to Ukraine. I mean, they voted to send $200 billion to Ukraine. I've been all over the mountains of Appalachia when I ask people, would you rather that your senators take care of you here in Asheville or here in Pikeville, here in Appalachia, would you rather them send your money to Ukraine? I don't get anybody wanting to send a penny to Ukraine. Look, you can have all kinds of sympathy in the world for Ukraine, hostility towards Russia being the aggressor nation, but we don't have the money. We're $2 trillion in the hole. Interest this year is going to be $1 trillion. And as far as passing this, I'm willing to let it pass today. He's going to object to passing his own bill today simply because it gets paid for. How crazy is that? Not even let the other side object to it. He's going to object to his own bill. I'm willing to let the bill pass, but take some of the fluff and boondoggle subsidies from the Green New Deal and put it into here. The money's sitting here. We put it into here for disasters. We help Asheville today. Oh, no, it's not the time nor the place to pay for things. The question before the Senate is whether on behalf of the American people, we should borrow and spend an additional $810 million for small business loans.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, on the Senate floor today. He objected to the unanimous consent request from Senator Thom Tillis and Senator Mark Warner to pass the original bill. Disaster relief for hurricane victims and other natural disasters may still be included in federal government funding that will need to be passed by December 20th to avoid a government shutdown. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, talked on the Senate floor today about that and other legislative business he expects to finish during this lame duck congressional session.
There is much the Senate has yet to accomplish before the end of the year. It'll be a busy time. Government funding is scheduled to run out on December the 20th. Both sides must work together to prevent a shutdown before then. Nobody wants to hear the words Christmas time shutdown a few weeks from now. I can't think of something the American people would want less during the holidays. Just as we've done repeatedly over the past couple of years, both sides must compromise and work together to make sure the government remains funded. We also need to pass the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, to provide for our troops and hold the line against America's adversaries. I hope our Republican colleagues work with us to advance key policies to outcompete the Chinese Communist Party and secure America's leadership on some of the most cutting technologies from our time, from AI to innovations in biotech and quantum computing and more. We've gotten the NDAA done over the last 6 decades without fail, and we must do it again this year. Another issue that requires our attention is disaster aid to support communities across the country in times of disaster. No state or community is immune from disaster. We've seen that over the last few years, from hurricanes in Florida and wildfires in Hawaii, floods in the Northeast, droughts on the West Coast, and everywhere in between. If we want to help these communities recover and rebuild after disasters, we must pass comprehensive, robust funding that leverages all programs across the federal government to help our communities in need. It's been a hallmark of America. When one of the regions of our country, one of the parts of our country, the towns, the villages, the counties, the states, have had real trouble because the hand of God through weather and disaster has affected them, the whole country rallies to their side. That's been a tradition. A few haven't abided by it on instances on the other side. But it's a tradition we must keep, and hopefully we can move forward on disaster aid. We also need to make progress on the Farm Bill, and I commend Chair Stabenow for her bipartisan work on this matter. Democrats are serious about getting a Farm Bill done, one that represents the needs of everyone, from farmers and ranchers to hungry Americans. And finally, as we continue to work through these matters, the Senate continues to make progress on confirming President Biden's highly qualified nominees. Today, the Senate will confirm another judge on the U.S. Tax Court and the director of the Office of Government Ethics, and will advance Embry Kidd's nomination for Circuit Court Judge for the 11th Circuit. So, Mr. President, we have a lot of work to do on several fronts, but I am encouraged so far by the cooperation on both sides.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. Washington Post has an article. Senate Democrats are staring down a shrinking timeline to confirm more than 24 of President Joe Biden's judicial nominees before they lose majority control of the chamber in January. with President-elect Donald Trump warning Republicans to do all they can to block the effort. If Democrats cannot confirm Biden's judicial picks, Trump will have the chance to fill those vacancies with more conservative nominees. That was from the Washington Post. Wall Street today, the Dow down 207, NASDAQ down 123, S&P down 36. President Biden putting out a statement that reads, "I've always said that every new small business is an act of hope. As of today, Americans have filed more than 20 million new business applications since Vice President Harris and I took office. That's 20 million acts of hope by the American people." Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and we'll send you the headlines in Washington every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.